So my name is Tim Broad. I'm a commercial beekeeper in Boulder, Colorado.
My name's Michael Breed. I'm a professor of biology at the University of Colorado Boulder.
So the question about how does climate change affect bees, that's part of it. The answer is yes, they do, in the same way that climate change affects all of us. I think it's very real, and I think that us humans have contributed significantly to it.
I personally think there's a very clear connection between greenhouse gases and much of the climate change we're seeing. We think climate change affects bees in big ways. One immediate way that climate change, I feel, is already affecting bees is changing the seasonality of flowering.
Bees and plants evolve together. There's a very, very symbiotic relationship there, and when you start affecting one, you affect the other substantially. Mostly what you see with climate change going on is that the seasonal patterns of moisture, dryness, the length of the seasons has been not just altering a little bit, but is becoming erratic. This last year we had almost all of April, there was very hard periods of freezing rain. What this freezing rain did is that it mostly froze the tips off of all of the fruit trees. So the fruit trees, which are one of the really big early pushes of blooms here, was kind of non-existent. So then you start getting huge die-offs internally, and then you couple with this the fact that, well, guess what? There's no food. There's no the fruit trees. It is known that honeybee populations today in America are about half of what they used to be, for example, in 1950. Honeybee systems have been severely impacted, and particularly the last decade. We see shifts going on season to season, year to year, which is about these wild changes in the weather.
So as the climate gets more variable, it makes it more difficult for bees to survive. There are certainly far fewer honeybees around than, say, when I arrived in Boulder 30 years ago. We've actually lost a lot of potential food for honeybees, and that, I think, has really had a negative impact also.
The lack of forage is due to many factors, of course, and one of them, certainly for consideration and on a large global scale, is of course global weather change. We typically, for example, have dandelions, which are actually one of the very, very first food sources here, by the first week of April. And for example, last year there weren't any until the end of April. Here in April, it was all this freezing. Last year, just recently had these huge floods.
That eliminates plants that bees can forage on. We rely on bees for pollination of many of our really important food crops.
If you were to walk through a grocery store, for example, almost all of the fruits that you see, apples, oranges, citruses, the vegetables, cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, squashes, pumpkin, almost many of the nuts that we eat. But it goes a little bit further than that. I mean, you can walk through and you could remove certainly 1/3 to 40% of all of the live produce in there. That would be from honeybees and pollinators. But then you start looking at all of the packaged items and the dried goods and think about what's inside of them and what came. Most of those have come from products that have been directly responsible from pollination. It would be a very, very stark, different kind of a landscape.
The produce department is essentially bare. If we didn't have bees for pollination, those products would be much more expensive or simply unavailable.
Imagine just eating oatmeal and wheat. That's really it. So many things that our bodies need, and we won't even talk about the vibrancy of life, of being able to walk out into a field or a garden and seeing the diversity and the plethora of different species. It'll be a very stark landscape.
Clearly, collectively, it's not a good picture for bees.
The question about what can we as a usual person, the normal denizens of Boulder County, let alone the world, do to help with declining bee populations. And I think one of the biggest things that you can do is that you can plant forage in your backyard.
What we might consider to be weeds or weedy growth is actually a good thing. We can make choices about our landscaping that actually foster bees but don't impact our enjoyment of the landscape.
Having food sources available for the bees, which for our area is from the end of March until the end of October, is hypercritical. And that's something that each and every one of us can do.